Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Avi Havivi's weekly Siddur class.
I said that we were done with the body of the Amidah and that we would now go on to Elohai Netzor, but I lied. So there's a couple of things that I realized are worth reviewing having to do with Modim, and I sort of skipped over some things. So we're going to backtrack to some maybe miscellaneous-ish kind of points about the latter part of the Amidah. We're not going to get to Elohai Netzor yet, God willing, next week. Okay, so if you want Modim in front of you, that is on page 216 in the Sim Shalom. I'm sorry.
41.
That's the evening service. Wait. That's the evening service. Modim is there, but page 41 in the Slim Shalom. And in the Sim Shalom, I don't want the evening service because I want
It's on page 116.
Thank you, 116. Because I also want the individual Modim, which we don't have in the evening service, because in the evening service is a repetition of the Amidah. 116 in the Sim, 41 in the Slim. Okay. First, Michael Ozer, who shared something with me after our last class, which I said, everyone should hear that.
Oh, well, okay. Thanks, Rabbi. This is in San Antonio. On Shabbat, we had a practice at the conservative synagogue there, Agudas Achim, Congregation Agudas Achim, where on Shabbat morning they would do, for the Musaf, they would do an abbreviated Musaf service. But, and during...
Sorry, and when you say abbreviated, just tell us what you mean by that.
Well, I mean, they did not do the full repetition with we went together
through Kedusha.
Through the Kedusha.
And then silent.
And then at the end of that period, the rabbi would say, if you're not finished, continue. But if you're finished, everybody, please join hands in your row, if you'd like. And everybody put their arms around each other, and they would do the priestly blessing. And then everybody would say, Ken Yehi Ratzon, And I thought that was interesting because you had spent time on that last week talking about what a loss it is when the shorter version is done, because you don't have the priestly blessing. So
yeah, nice. I thought that was a nice custom, so I wanted Michael to share it with everyone.
Yeah, of course. This was all pre-COVID.
Yes, right.
And after COVID came, we didn't do that anymore.
6 feet on all directions of space, right?
You'd have to have awfully long arms.
Yeah, Michael, and I'm just curious, just as an aesthetic liturgical thing, did the rabbi or cantor just say Yivarechecha, or was there some musical?
No, you sang it basically.
Got it.
People participate.
I got it. And I'm sure there are musical versions. I'm sure. I haven't looked to see if the late Debbie Friedman wrote a melody for Yivarechecha, but I'm sure she did, because she wrote melodies for so many other public liturgical things. And I suspect in Reform synagogues, such a tune might be used more often than in conservative synagogues. That's very nice. Right. Good. So a way to kind of not lose the Birkat Kohanim. And of course, in that shul, I'm guessing they had a repetition of the Amidah in Shachrit, where they said the priestly blessing, except the problem with that, of course, is that at least half the congregation is not present yet in shul at that moment, right? So there are shuls where they say, well, we did that already, but we did that. If you want that, you come come at 9:45, right? So, and there are a lot of people who, I among them, who would say that's tough. I might not be there in time. Okay. Anyone want to say anything else about Birkat Kohanim that they want to share? Because then I'm going to go back to Modim. We're going in backwards direction. Birkat Kohanim as part of, remember, Birkat Kohanim is part of the bracha Sim Shalom. It is a part of the 19th bracha. So now let's backtrack to Modim. So Michael corrected me on a halachic point that I appreciated last week, that I went and I researched, and I realized that at age 63, I've been doing Modim wrong for, I don't know, over 55 years. Maybe they taught me this in Orthodox day school and I just don't remember it. But so old habits are hard to break, Michael. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. So in fact, I always thought that for Modim, you go Modim Anachnu Lach, the same way you go Baruch Atah Hashem, meaning bend the knees at the first word, bow at the second word, and then be erect when you are addressing God. But in fact, that's wrong. Halachically, you're supposed to just bend from the waist when you say Modim, and Modim Anachnu Lach Sha'ata Hu, and you're supposed to be bowed for the first 5 words. This is it's all minhag, all right? But the minhag is you bow from the waist, meaning you don't bend the knees. It's just, again, the people who are listening can't see this, but it's just you bow from the waist, Modim Anachnu Lach Sha'ata Hu, and then you stand up erect for Hashem, for God's name. So in fact, that appears to be the halachically valid custom for how to do it. And, good luck to me to try to change old habits. Again, when I was discussing this last week, I think I said this, I suspect you'd have to say, like, why is the minhag different? The thing that's different of Modim, of course, as opposed to the 3 other bowings, is the 3 other bowings are on Baruch Atah Hashem, meaning it's a different formula. Baruch is interpreted to mean a whole bunch of things: blessed, infused with blessing, overflowing with blessing. But one of the interpretations of Baruch is that it's related to the word berech, the verb, the noun and the verb, which means to kneel or to bend the knee, right? So one possible interpretation of Baruch, it's probably not the pshat, all right? It's probably not the original simplest meaning of why the rabbi said the blessing formula has to have Baruch Atah Hashem. It's probably kind of a midrashic secondary meaning, but one understanding of it, the secondary meaning, is that Baruch is sort of mean we kneel before you, right? So we bend the knee. So it would make sense to bend the knee at Baruch, but not necessarily at Modim, meaning there's no, if you want to connect it to the word Baruch, there's no reason you should bend the knee for Modim. If you're just saying thank you, you can just, bow your head. Okay? So thank you, Michael, for correcting me on that. Any question or comment about that point? By the way, I want to say one more thing that I forgot last time. The halakha does say, which we'll look at that halakha in a moment, that we bow at Modim beginning and end. And so I don't think we said this explicitly, but I'm now saying the bracha at the end, Baruch Atah Hashem, is when you bow. So just as at Avot, the first bracha, you bend the knee, bow, and then stand up straight for Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Elokeinu, and then at the end of that bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avraham Ufokei Tzara, right? So the halakha says you bow in the Amidah 4 times, and it says that because the statutory or required Amidah is just the 19 blessings or 7 blessings on Shabbat, not Elohai Netzor. Elohai Netzor is seen as an additional extra thing that's not part of the core Amidah. So those bowings that you do at the end aren't counted in the halakha. We'll get to them. But the core halakha says we bow 4 times in the Amidah, and the first blessing, Avot, beginning and end, and in Modim, beginning and end. And if you said, well, why Modim and not the other ones? It's just kind of intuitive because that's the one where we say, thank you, God, right? So it seems appropriate we bow at the first bracha because we're entering God's presence, we're starting, and then we bow at Modim because that's the one where we say thank you, God. So we bow beginning and end. So beginning, in fact, you bend at the waist for Modim anachnu lach sha'atahu, and then stand up erect for Hashem, right? God's name. Whereas at the end bracha, that bracha at the end, you do it b'chatima, the closing of Modim. You do it the same way you do it in Avot. Baruch atah, right? Bend the knee at Baruch, bow at atah, then stand erect for Hashem, Hatov Shimcha Ulachana El Hodot. Your name is good, and it is good to thank you. Okay? So that's the 4 bowings of the Amidah. Now I will pause for question and comment. Michael, then Terry. No, it was really Terry, then Michael. Sorry. Terry had her hand up first.
We're going to look at the halacha. I just wanted to see.
We'll look a little bit at the halacha, yes.
Thank you. That's all.
Michael.
Yes, if I may, can I take the drash of Baruch and Barek one step farther?
Sure.
I've always thought that the word sounded like break. Baruch, Barek, break.
Uh-huh.
And there's the English phrase that we use to wish someone well on stage by saying break a leg.
Uh-huh.
And what that means, from my understanding, is that means that your performance should be so good that the king or queen in the royal box at the theater stands and acknowledges you, and you are then to bow to the sun.
I'm not a theater guy, so I never knew that. Okay.
So that break means to bend the knee, just like Barek and
Okay.
Baruch.
Okay. A midrash connecting it's either a midrash connecting the English to the Hebrew, or we could just say it's a mnemonic to help Michael remember it. Yeah. Yeah. By the way, and what this means is, and by the way, the halacha is explicit that you're not supposed to bow at the other Baruch Atahs in the Amidah. And many of us will see, for people who are, let us say, less familiar with the choreography of how to be in synagogue, that in shuls, not of how to be in synagogue, the choreography of kind of what to do with your body during the prayers, that in shuls you'll sometimes see when we do a Heicha Kedusha, when the congregation says the first part of the Amidah up to Kedusha aloud with the Chazan, you'll see some people bow at Baruch Atah Hashem Mechayeh HaMeitim, right? The Baruch Atah at the end of the second blessing. And this is simply wrong. Okay. Of course, it's hard to know, if you see someone doing something wrong and they're, as far as you know, it's wrong in terms of your knowledge base in shul. What are you supposed to do? Do you tell someone? How do you tell someone? That's a very complicated question, which I'm not going to go into. Okay. So I want to look at a couple of halachic sources about Modim. That's what I'm going to do next, unless someone has another question or comment. All right. I'm going to look at 2 things. So this is from Sefaria, but I want to show everyone how to find this. Again, I've done this once before. So Sefaria is a great resource which aims to have all Jewish textual wisdom ever printed available on the internet. It is a free resource, quote unquote free. Quote unquote means you have access to it for free, but it costs a lot of money to set it up. And so as Michael, it wasn't Michael, it's Larry reminded me to say last time, but it costs money, so make a contribution to them. All right, so I haven't done it from scratch, but you go to sefaria.org, Sefaria, sefaria.org. It'll always have an aleph and an A in big letters in the top right, so you can click on what language do you want. Some things are only in Hebrew and haven't been translated into English. It has Tanakh and the Talmuds and all the halachic commentaries and Hasidic literature and a zillion things. So if you you could click on halacha, and then it lists a bunch of books, and then you could click on Shulchan Arikh, right? And if you knew, because you were studying in some source that said this is in Shulchan Arikh, Orach Chaim, Shulchan Arikh has 4 divisions. The first division is called Orach Chaim, Way of Life, chapter 121. Then you would go to Orach Chaim, chapter 121, and you would find this. Okay? Siman is the way they say chapter in halachic literature. Okay? the laws of Modim, which has 3 paragraphs. Paragraph 1. Unfortunately doesn't list the 3 paragraphs as 1, 2, and 3. If you looked at an actual Shulchan Arikh book, it would have Aleph, Bet, and Gimel. So paragraph 1, Shochin b'modim tchila vasof. You bow at Modim at the beginning and the end. And notice the Shulchan Arikh does not say how to bow. Those are later other commentaries on the Shulchan Arikh that give the specifics. I'm not going to bring that text today. Okay? So you bow at Modim, beginning and end. This is a section of Shulchan Arikh, by the way, that goes through the Amida paragraph by paragraph, and it says, are there anything about this Amida, like, anything about this particular blessing you're supposed to do or you're supposed to know. Okay. Paragraph 2, Ha'omer Modim Mishatkin Oto. This goes back to the Talmud, this saying, a person who says aloud, which generally means the Chazan, because that's the only person you would hear aloud. Modim, twice, we silence them. Anyone know why that is? In Talmudic times. So in Talmudic times, we know about, rabbinic battles against sectarians. And for sectarians, we usually think of either pagans or Christian Jews, Jewish Christians. But there were also sectarians in late antiquity and rabbinic times, Mishnah and Talmud times, who were what's called binitarians. They believed that there were 2 deities, right? We're less familiar with this quote-unquote heresy, but in Gnosticism, there were widespread beliefs in late antiquity that there were 2 deities. It was sort of like a big, absent, set up the universe, disappeared and doesn't care deity, and then a lesser deity who was appointed to run the world, who is less good, and actually evil comes from that second deity. Okay? It wasn't Zoroastrian binitarianism, that there's force of good and force of evil. Okay, there was that in Zoroastrian, which was in Persia, but even in Eretz Yisrael, there was Gnosticism, spelled with a G, Gnosticism, and some of the Gnostics were binitarians. Okay, they believed in an upper deity and a lower deity, and so there were some Jewish people who the rabbis defined as heretics with non-normative beliefs. Okay, and one of the non-normative practices based on a non-normative belief was that you might say something to both deities. So you'd be saying Modim, Modim. By the way, some scholars say this rabbinic polemic also stands behind the first 2 lines of the Aleinu. Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol latet gedola liotzer breshit. Right, it is incumbent upon us to worship the Adon Hakol, the master of all, to give greatness to the fashioner of creation. Right? So some scholars say that Adon Hakol and Yotzer Breshit were titles for these 2 deities, and the Aleinu is saying they're not 2, they're actually the same deity. Okay? That the God who's involved in creating us, the puppet, there's like a puppet master God, quote unquote, and that's different than the far off original God. So it strikes us as a odd idea, but this was a thing back then. They called it they didn't call it binitarianism. Scholars today, academic scholars, call it binitarianism. I think that's what it's called. I think that's how it's pronounced, which is the belief that there were 2 deities. So if the Chazan seems to be saying in Modim something that implies that the Chazan is a heretic, we shush them, which really means we remove them as Chazan. That's what that means, practically speaking, right? Sorry, you can't do that, right? You can't be Chazan anymore. You're a heretic, okay? And we know that in late antiquity, in the rabbinic era, I'm going to say in the 100s, 200s, 300s, there was a lot of shuffling around of belief in the Jewish world and in its surrounding late Hellenistic world. This shuffling of belief is what made, much of the Mediterranean world ripe for Christianity. Okay, and there were various schools of thought, and the sages who ended up defining our Judaism, which is what we call Rabbinic Judaism or Talmudic Judaism or Classical Judaism. I'll use all of those terms as rough synonyms. They decided that all these other beliefs were heretical. Okay, this is part of their carving out their path forward of Judaism, right? So binitarianism was heretical. Chazan who said modim, we shush them. Any comment or question about that? Okay. Then I came across this and I didn't know this. Yachid ein lo lomar birkat kohanim. When you're praying individually, which means either when you're saying your private Amidah, or if you're praying alone without a minyan, in which case you're praying your private Amidah, you do not say birkat kohanim, Eloheinu v'Eloheinu. That part I knew, but this part in the smaller print I didn't know. For those who might remember this, we've said it before, the Shulchan Arikh, in brief, was written by a Sephardi author, Rav Yosef Karo, in either the 1500s or the 1600s. I always mix those two centuries up. I shouldn't, but I do. And then when it reached Ashkenazic lands, Rav Moshe Isserles, who was a Polish rabbi, wrote comments on it where Ashkenazi practice differed from Sephardi practice. And in a printed Shulchan Aruch, those are written in different fonts. And in Sepharia, the big font is the Shulchan Aruch by Rav Yosef Karo, the original book. And the smaller font is the comments or glosses by the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserles, the Ashkenazi practice. Okay. Haggah in Hebrew means comment. V'chein ikar. This is correct. This is the primary opinion. He's saying what the Shulchan Aruch said is correct halacha. V'chein nir'eh li linhog. And it seems to me that this is the correct practice also. Aval haminhag hapashut eino kain. But the widespread custom is not this. Rak afilu yachid omeroto kol zman shera'ui l'nesiat kapayim. Okay? The widespread custom is that individuals say Birkat Kohanim. Ve'eno nireh. But that does not appear to be correct. So the Ramah is making a very interesting comment. He says, the Shulchan Aruch says, when you're praying individually, you do not say Birkat Kohanim, which is kind of what we're familiar with, right? That's our practice. And I think that is correct. And this is my custom or practice. However, there is a widespread practice, apparently, he is saying, that individuals do say Birkat Kohanim, and this seems to me wrong. So, again, in terms of development of practice, it's interesting that he's giving this candid opinion, which is that, I'm a rabbi. I see all these people doing this thing. It's a widespread practice. I think they're technically actually wrong for doing that. And there's a source for that. And it's not my minhag. But apparently the people have a widespread minhag. Right. I want to say minhag in Hebrew, where my cursor is, haminhag hapashut. Pashut in modern Israeli Hebrew means simple practice, but that's not what it means in Rabbinic Hebrew. It means widespread, because lifshot means to spread. Okay, so I see everyone around me doing this other minhag, which is wrong, right? We kind of imagine the Ramah sort of, putting up his hands and shrugging his shoulders. It's like kind of, what can I do? They're all doing it wrong, but it's sort of like everyone bowing at Baruch Atah Hashem B'chayei HaMeitim, right? If you're in a shul where it's like, it's the wrong practice. I have sources for it that it's wrong. It's apparently widespread. What can I do? All right, so that's kind of what I imagine the Ramah shrugging. Okay, Any comment about that? Then we're going to go on to Modim D'Rabbanan, another halachic source about that, the individual Modim that you say while the Chazan says the Modim. Jeff, I can't see everyone's hand, by the way, in screen share mode. So you have to jump in. Go ahead, Jeff.
The 3 paragraphs.
Yes.
That is referred to at the beginning. That's the Modim that we see.
Yes.
The Birkat Kohanim.
No, the 3 paragraphs is you bow at Modim, beginning and end, line 1. Number 2, the person who says Modim twice, we shut them up. And then number 3, the individual does not say Birkat Kohanim. Those are the 3 paragraphs in chapter 121.
Oh, so they're self-referring. I see.
Yeah, okay. It's not 3 paragraphs of Modim. It says in chapter 121, there are 3 paragraphs. By the way, what that probably means is, I'm guessing, in the original manuscript of the Shulchan Arikh, I'm guessing it might not have said Aleph, Bet, and Gimel. Maybe there was an indentation or something else to indicate that there are 3 paragraphs. That's just referring to in chapter 121, there are going to be 3 paragraphs. I'm just telling you, in a printed Shulchan Arikh, it says Aleph, Bet, and Gimel. And for whatever reason, probably having to do with technical setting up things online, Safari doesn't do that.
Yes. Avi, okay.
Yeah, Terry.
So in all of your years in various shuls, have you ever witnessed a leader saying Modim, Modim?
No, because binatarianism is not a hot issue nowadays. Apparently it was in the year, I think this is from the Mishnah, by the way. So apparently it was in the year 200.
I get it. The other part of my question is this.
By the way, I just want to say, and it's in the Mishnah, okay? So that means it's important. That's why it's in the Shulchan Arikh, okay? Trust me, in the year 1500 or 1600, there weren't binatarian heretics either. That issue was over by the end of late antiquity. There are no more Gnostics.
But it goes back to something you casually mentioned earlier, which is when you see someone doing something through the Amida that isn't correct.
Isn't correct according to what I know, because what I know is limited, because I might think, hey, Michael Harris, you're not bending the knees when you say Modim, and you're wrong for not bending the knees. And I might be wrong because I don't know everything.
Okay.
But go on with your question.
No, I was curious if one would come across somebody who was doing something like that is discussed here. How would you silence that person?
Well, silence is different from, I think my fellow member in the pew is a little confused and I want to help them learn.
Right. That is different.
By the way, the reason it's silenced is because it's really about, in the Mishnah, it's really about the Chazan. Okay. It's really about someone who is using a public moment to promulgate their heresy publicly.
Political.
Right. So it's a different thing, right? It's like, oh, this is dangerous, right? So again, these people, binatarians, Christian Jews, they lived within the Jewish community. The rabbis were staking out their authority. And so they said, if we hear certain things in the congregation, we must silence that. And what they really meant is the Chazan. Okay? There are other things in the Mishnah, in that same Mishnah passage in Brachot about certain other things the Chazan says, we kick them off the bima, so to speak. We silence them. Okay? That's different than, I don't know. I'm saying the weekday Amida in shul silently, and I notice the person up the row from me is actually bowing 19 times. They bow at the end of every Baruch Atah Hashem. What would I do about that? That's a much harder question, right? I'm not their rabbi. If I was their rabbi, I might have a delicate way of saying, hey, I'd love to study with you sometimes. I know there are all kinds of different customs. I like to study with you, sometimes some of the procedures for the choreography of the Amida. But of course, it's America, right? So that's the land where some people would say, well, okay, that's nice, but this is my custom, right?
Okay.
I always say to people, and this was always traditional in Jewish communities, watch the authoritative person, watch the rabbi, and see what they do. And then you can sometimes say, Rabbi, I noticed when you walk backwards at the end of Elohai Netzor, you click your heels together 3 times as if you're Dorothy. It's saying there's no place like home. Is that the minhag? I've never seen that before. And then they might say, well, no, that's just a practice, but that's not the authoritative thing. The normative thing is you don't actually click, but you walk backwards this way, right? So do you walk backwards with the left or the right first? What's the first thing you do to answer questions like that? Is you look at the Rebbe and you watch what they do, right? Just like the story in the Talmud of the students who hid under the Rebbe's marital bed, right, to overhear the sex life. And when the Rebbe caught them, they said, Torah, but this is also Torah and I need to learn it, right? Meaning, how an intimate relationship should proceed in a state of holiness. This is also part of Torah, and I need to know that also, right? So you always, step one is look at what the rabbi does. I say the rabbi as the person who is deemed to be the authoritative figure in the congregation,
okay.
Right? Part of the It's America ethos is everyone's an expert for themselves, and we've lost to some extent the ethos, in non-Orthodox circles, in non-Orthodox synagogues, we've tended to lose the ethos of you follow what the rabbi does. You watch what the rabbi does, right? Step one in learning how to practice be Torah is watch what the rabbi does. That's kind of the kind of primary part of the traditional rabbinic ethos throughout the ages. How do you say Kiddush? You say Kiddush the way your Rebbe does. How do you hold the cup? You watch how the rabbi holds the cup, right? And again, this is because most people either were, I don't want to say illiterate, but semi-literate and didn't have access to books and didn't have study time, so they didn't have time to read a book to tell them how to hold the Kiddush cup, right? They would watch the authoritative person, how they held the Kiddush cup, and that's how they learned to do it. When do you bow? You watch when the rabbi bows.
So would you say that from a sociological perspective, comments that one hears commonly in American congregations about, I daven the way my father davened, or this is the way my family did it. Yeah. You wouldn't necessarily hear that in other communities or in a more traditional.
You hear that also because, there's an awareness that people come from, again, the shul, even if you go to an Orthodox shul, is no longer the shul in some village in Poland where your forebears grew up and your forebears grew up and died. You will grow up and die, and your descendants will grow up and die, right? So there are people coming to American synagogues from different traditions,
right?
Okay, and so there is respect for, I'm going to call it parental minhag, right? So there are certain things which are minhag, just custom, not halacha. There's a difference between minhag and halacha. So if you take this seriously, which not everyone does, if you said, well, my mother bowed 19 times in the weekday Amida, then your rabbi would say, well, I'm sure she was very devout, but that's actually not the correct minhag. Okay. Once I didn't want to get my tefillin checked because I knew that they would be declared pasul. and then I'd have to get a new pair of tefillin. And I was talking to the sofer who said, you really should have them checked. And I said, well, they're my grandfather's tefillin, so they have sentimentality. And he said to me, you know what? I bet your grandfather would want you to be wearing kosher tefillin. Right? So you're not honoring the memory of your grandfather by not having those old tefillin checked. You think you're honoring the memory of your grandfather, right? I was corrected by the sofer, the scribe, who is also a rabbi, right? The point was well taken. We're going to wrap up in a moment. So this is a complicated question, right? And even when I say in synagogues, Orthodox synagogues nowadays, they will still tend to be defined. It'll be a yeshivish synagogue or a Hasidish synagogue, but there's still awareness that there's mixture of minhagim. So when you're in an Ashkenazi synagogue and there's a Sephardi person there saying Kaddish, and they add V'yatzmach Purkanei V'karev Meshichei, right, which is a thing that Sephardim say in Kaddish, no one says to them, don't say that. We're an Ashkenazi synagogue. You can't say that here, right? So there is recognition that people come from different kind of minhagim, but those minhagim, what defines a minhag isn't just my mother did that. That's a family practice. Minhag is actually a technical halachic term. It means a ritual practice that has some basis in halacha as being defined as a minhag. Okay, so just because you do something and that's your practice, that doesn't make it a minhag. Minhag is a halachic term. In contemporary modern Israeli Hebrew, you would say that's my minhag, which means that's my practice, right? But in halacha, there's halacha, means this is the rule, and there's minhag, which is custom, which is less binding than the rule, but it's still a technical term. It doesn't mean anything that anyone does is a minhag. So, hey, that's my minhag, that's my practice, isn't the same thing as I come from a lineage that has a specific minhag that is rooted somewhere, which very often has to do with, can you find it somewhere in some halachic source? Okay, we're running over and far afield, and I wanted to do the Talmud passage on the individual Modim. We'll try to do that next week, and we'll go on to Elohai Netzor. And thanks for coming, and be Torah, and everyone have a good, healthy day.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.